Settle yourself in now, and allow your thoughts to slow. Let the worries of your day fall gently away, like dried leaves fluttering from a forgotten tree in an ancient forest. Imagine candlelight flickering against heavy stone walls, the scent of beeswax and old parchment lingering in the air. Outside, a cool mist hangs above muddy streets, muffling the sound of distant hooves on cobblestone. This is not the modern world of swipes, text messages, or awkward coffee shop encounters. This is the Middle Ages. Tonight, we'll walk softly through a world where romance was ruled less by the heart and more by hierarchy, property, and power. The journey will take us deep into the winding alleys of medieval lover, something like it. From the humblest peasant villages to the gilded courts of nobility, we'll uncover why the search for companionship in medieval times was far from a fairy tale and, for many, a quietly endured ordeal. So breathe deeply and let yourself drift into another time, another way of life, a distant world where love wore a very different face. Let us begin not in castles or keeps, but in the small, smoky homes of ordinary villagers. These were the uncelebrated corners of medieval Europe, places where romance such as it was shaped by custom, necessity, and the rhythm of the seasons. Picture a small rural hamlet in 13th century England or France. Narrow paths crisscross between thatched roof cottages, bordered by low stone fences and chicken coops. The air smells faintly of damp straw and wood smoke. A cart creaks by, drawn by a sluggish ox, and somewhere beyond the fields, a bell tolls the passing hour from a distant monastery. Life here is hard. Days begin at dawn and end not long after dusk. For many, marriage is not about affection. It is a contract, often arranged by families to secure land, produce heirs, and form alliances with nearby neighbours. Young men and women rarely have the luxury of choosing freely. Fathers and occasionally mothers would negotiate arrangements that were practical, often involving livestock, land parcels, or labour agreements. The concept of romantic love, while not entirely unknown, was not the central concern. A strong back, a full pantry, and healthy livestock mattered more than tender feelings. Courtship, such as it existed, might involve a local festival or church gathering. These moments were brief, supervised, and deeply bound by custom. A maypole dance at midsummer could provide a rare chance for shy glances and fleeting conversation. But even then, villagers were always aware of watching eyes and listening ears. In the low hum of village life, privacy was a rare and precious thing. Most homes were single-room dwellings, shared by entire families. This meant that whispered words between lovers were seldom spoken, and affection was often coded in gestures, perhaps a shared chore, a bundle of herbs left on a doorstep, or a glance exchanged across the pews on Sunday morning. And yet, even in these quiet routines, trouble brewed. Marriages were frequently arranged when individuals were still in their teens, sometimes younger. Betrothals were binding, often set in place before a child was even of age. Breaking them carried shame and legal consequences. For women especially, a single mistake, a rumor of impropriety, an unwed pregnancy could result in ostracization or worse. For the poor, the nightmare of dating wasn't so much the chaos of rejection or heartbreak as it was the complete lack of autonomy. One's future might be decided over a handshake between fathers, sealed with a dowry and the exchange of a goat. The church, ever present, layered its own strict expectations. Premarital relations were forbidden, and weddings could only occur with the blessing of the local priest. But enforcement varied widely. In some places, hand-for-stinger form of informal engagement, often sealed with a private vow, persisted well into the 16th century. It was not uncommon for couples to consider themselves wed long before any official ceremony took place. But for all its rigidity, medieval life still made space for subtle expressions of affection. A shared loaf of bread, a hand brushed during harvest. And once married, couples often formed genuine, tender partnerships. Survival was a joint effort. Daily life required cooperation, resilience, and quiet devotion. As you let that image settle of simple people weaving small strands of affection through a harsh world, we will next rise from these humble roots and step into the life of a single figure, caught in the web of status, expectation, and desire. Now let us turn our attention from the low villages and muddy lanes to the glittering courts of medieval power. Here, among the nobility, courtship was not only complex, it was political, performative, and perilously constrained by etiquette. One of the most intriguing figures to navigate this gilded labyrinth was Eleanor of Aquitaine, a woman whose life, love, and marriages spanned the 12th century and left echoes that still shape our understanding of medieval romance today. Imagine a tall, poised figure, draped in embroidered silks, walking slowly through the echoing halls of a limestone palace in Poitiers. Tapestries line the walls, rich with hunting scenes and mythological creatures, soft footfalls on rush-strewn floors. A flicker of candlelight illuminates the jewels at her throat symbols, not only of wealth, but of her powerful lineage. Eleanor was not merely a passive participant in courtly love, she helped shape its very mythology. As Duchess of Aquitaine, Queen of France, and later Queen of England, her influence reached far beyond the domestic sphere. She was well-read, politically astute, and unafraid to wield her authority in an age that was largely hostile to powerful women. But her romantic life was hardly idyllic. Her first marriage, to King Louis VII of France, was arranged when she was just a teenager. Though he was devout and mild-mannered, Eleanor found Louis lacking in passion and ambition. Their union was politically expedient but personally strained, culminating in a divorce after 15 years, a rare and scandalous event. Her second marriage, to the dynamic and volatile Henry II of England, was equally strategic. Their courtship was swift, and together they ruled an empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. But domestic life was stormy. Henry's infidelities, Eleanor's political intrigues, and the ambitions of their many children created a household defined more by conflict than by companionship. And yet, during her years in Poitiers, Eleanor presided over one of the most romanticized aspects of medieval courtship, the court of love. Whether it was a formal institution or more of a literary salon is debated by historians. But what is certain is that under her patronage, troubadours, poets, and noble ladies crafted and codified the ideals of courtly Louvre style of romantic expression that was often unattainable, illicit, and more rhetorical than real. This was not the love of marriage or shared life. It was the love of longing, of knights yearning for unattainable ladies, of noble women choosing their lovers not for social advancement, but for their poetic devotion. It was governed by rules as strict and layered as any legal code. There were stages of affection to be performed, grievances to be weighed, and games of the heart played with careful, calculated gestures. But these were games with high stakes. A misplaced word, an unseemly touch, or a too obvious desire could ruin reputations or worse. And despite the poetic imagery, this culture of love rarely benefited women. While noblemen could channel their frustrations into verse or tournaments, noble women risked everything: their honor, their standing, even their freedom. Eleanor herself spent 16 years under house arrest, ordered by her husband Henry II, after she supported a rebellion by their sons. Even a queen, with all her learning and power, could find herself confined when her desires ran counter to her husband's will. Her story reminds us that in the medieval world, love was rarely simple and rarely safe. Even among the privileged, it could be a source of entrapment rather than liberation. And yet, the image of Eleanor lingers, not as a tragic figure, but as a woman who understood the language of power, of romance, and of selfhood. Her life was not easy, but it was deeply textured, shaped by the many masks love was forced to wear. As we leave her candlelit court behind, let us next explore the quiet corridors of curiosity, where mystery and custom intertwine. In our next segment, we'll look at some of the more puzzling and unexpected aspects of medieval relationships, traces of love and union, found not in ballads, but in buried bones and unearthed tokens of affection. As we step softly now into the quiet realms of archaeology and the subtle mysteries of the past, we leave behind the grand halls of Eleanor's court and descend gently into the earth. Beneath layers of time and silence, remnants of relationships, long forgotten, begin to emerge, not through words or records, but through the patient excavation of grave goods, household relics, and the layout of ancient dwellings. The soil remembers even what the parchment does not. In the English countryside, for instance, archaeologists have uncovered burial sites where couples were laid side by side, sometimes hand in hand, their bones gently echoing an intimacy that no document ever recorded. These lovers' graves, while rare, offer haunting glimpses into the emotional world of medieval people. Were these arranged unions that became fond partnerships? Or were they quiet rebellions against societal norms relationships, too delicate or forbidden to be named above ground? We cannot say for certain, but the presence of joint burials, particularly those without the formal trappings of nobility, suggests a subtle resistance to the rigid expectations of the time. In a world where marriage was often dictated by utility, perhaps these graves hint at a deeper truth. Love, when found, might have been cherished in private, if not in life, then at least in death. Elsewhere, small tokens tell quiet stories. In York, a leather shoe was discovered beneath a medieval floorboard, carefully placed as part of a folk tradition. Though not explicitly romantic, such hidden objects were often tied to rites of protection and fertility, placed near hearths, doors, or beds to bless unions or ward off misfortune. A modest charm, maybe, from one spouse to another, a gesture of affection, tucked beneath the feet of daily life. Even written relics, fragile as they are, offer curious insights. In the margins of prayer books and monastic manuscripts, we occasionally find love charms, hastily scribbled between Latin lines. These were not grand declarations, but small, earnest pleas perhaps from a young woman hoping her suitor would return from war, or a man fearful his love had chosen another. Some were crude, others elaborate. A few were folded into little packages and worn against the skin, inked with sacred names or whispered phrases. "May she burn with love for me," one 14th century scrap implores, as the wax burns in the flame. Such charms reveal not only desire, but desperation, the anxiety of love, in a time when the future was always uncertain, and one's options were seldom one's own. More curious still are the rings, engraved not with names but riddles. One such example, dated to the late 13th century, bears the phrase in Middle French, "Je suis votre sans départir," I am yours without departing. These were not wedding bands as we know them today, but posy rings, sometimes exchanged in secret or worn as talismans of silent devotion. The engraving itself was often hidden on the inside of the band, words held close, never shown, just as love itself often was. In rare cases, love was recorded in defiance of expectation. In 2007, the remains of a woman were found buried in a Dominican friary in Scotland, a site traditionally reserved for men. She had been carefully laid to rest among the friars, her presence unexplained by formal records. Who was she? A noble patron? A figure of religious importance? Or perhaps the object of quiet affection, granted an eternal place among those she cherished? We do not know. And perhaps it is this very absence of certainty that gives medieval love its peculiar poignancy. For in the Middle Ages, affection so often lived in the margins, in the scraps, the symbols, and the soil. A glance here, a charm there, a burial too tender to be coincidental. Now, as we surface gently from these hidden remnants of feeling, our gaze shifts upward from the ground to the throne. In our next chapter, we'll explore how the pursuit of love, status, and power shaped not only individuals but entire societies. The rules of romance were never truly equal, and few places made this clearer than the glittering, dangerous world of medieval elites. Let us now ascend the carved stone staircases of wealth and station, stepping into a world perfumed with myrrh and political intent. Here, in the candlelit chambers of aristocrats and monarchs, love was never the first consideration. It was, at best, a distant whisper behind the thunderous machinery of power. In the courts of medieval Europe, marriage was less a bond between hearts, and more a chess move in an unending game of land, legacy, and diplomacy. Alliances were forged not over romantic candlelight, but through formal contracts, heraldic negotiations, and the careful weighing of dowries and bloodlines. A nobleman might seek a bride, not for her temperament or companionship, but for the acres that accompanied her name. Likewise, a noblewoman's future was often decided before she was even of age, her value tabulated in titles, connections, and capacity for bearing heirs. Imagine a young countess, barely 15, seated at a high-backed chair in her family's manor. Her hands rest on her lap, gloved and still. Outside the arched window, the sun dapples the garden in gold, but she is not free to walk there today, not while emissaries from a neighbouring duchy negotiate her future in the great hall below. She might never meet her intended before the wedding ceremony. When she does, the interaction will be formal, perhaps awkward, overseen by elders and religious officials. The ceremony itself, though lavish, is ritualistic, less about joy and more about legitimacy. And once the union is sealed, her role becomes one of duty, to manage the household, to produce heirs, to reflect her husband's status. In many cases, affection grows slowly, if at all. There are records of noble couples who became fond companions over time, even confidants, but these were not guaranteed outcomes. Indeed, for some, the marital bed was little more than a cold obligation. For noblemen, affairs outside of marriage were expected, even accepted, so long as they did not threaten inheritance lines. Royal mistresses might wield quiet influence at court, given apartments, jewels, or political favour. Meanwhile, noble women found their movements carefully watched. A lady's indiscretion, real or imagined, could lead to exile, annulment, or seclusion in a convent. The upper classes, though steeped in luxury, were not spared from heartbreak. Consider the story of Peter Abelard and Heloise. Though he was a philosopher and she a gifted scholar, their tragic love affair unfolded against a backdrop of scandal and punishment. When their relationship was discovered, it led to violent repercussions and forced monastic vows. Their later letters, though tender and philosophical, reflect a deep sorrow over the impossibility of personal happiness in a world ruled by constraint. For some noble women, religious life offered the only refuge from the burdens of marriage. Becoming a nun, especially for those who entered, voluntarily could provide autonomy, education, and a sisterhood of sorts. Within the walls of a convent, one might escape the expectations of heirs and households, and instead pursue a life of contemplation and self-direction. But even this path was rarely a choice made in freedom. It too was often arranged by family, another way to manage a daughter's future without scandal or cost. And yet, among the duties and deceptions, moments of real connection occasionally bloomed. There are surviving letters of noble husbands writing home from war with concern and affection, asking after their children or praising their wives' strength in holding the estate. These quiet notes suggest that behind the armour and the ceremony, some individuals did manage to find warmth, small embers of intimacy within the grand architecture of obligation. As you rest now with the image of embroidered tapestries, gilded goblets, and careful smiles behind closed doors, we'll gently step into another realm entirely. For beyond the aristocracy and the common folk, beyond even the church's reach, there were those who lived on the edge of society laws, outcasts, and those who loved in ways forbidden or hidden. Their stories form the next layer in our journey. Now we drift to the edges of the medieval world, those quiet, shadowy spaces, where official records grow sparse and voices, long silenced, whisper through the gaps. Here, on the margins of society, lived those who loved in defiance of expectation, custom, and law. In medieval Europe, the rules of love were tightly drawn. Marriages were arranged, unions monitored, and deviations punished. Yet human hearts then, as now rarely conformed so neatly, begin, if you will, by picturing a narrow back street of a medieval town at dusk. Lanterns flicker low, casting long golden reflections across puddled stone. A woman in a woolen cloak hurries between buildings, glancing behind her, not out of fear, but out of necessity, for the kind of affection she seeks is one that must remain unseen. Same-sex relationships, though often erased or euphemized in historical texts, undoubtedly existed. In monasteries and convents, in court circles, and among the peasantry, individuals formed close emotional and, at times, romantic bonds. The language of affection survives in letters, poetry, and in the disapproval of church records where certain friendships were condemned as too familiar or unnaturally affectionate. In the 14th century English court rolls, for example, there are brief, chilling references to women accused of living together as man and wife, and to men punished for sodomy, a term broadly applied and heavily stigmatized. The punishments ranged from fines and public penance to, in more severe cases, execution. But the fact that such punishments existed implies that these relationships, though hidden, persisted. In the monasteries of medieval Europe, scholars have uncovered correspondence rich with affection. Though not all of it was romantic, the intensity of feeling suggests that these enclosed communities were places where bonds could form deeply, perhaps too deeply for the comfort of outside authorities. Then there were those whose identities did not fit neatly into medieval categories at all. The term transgender did not exist, but there are recorded cases of individuals assigned female at birth living and working as men joining guilds, taking apprentices, and sometimes even marrying women. Whether motivated by safety, freedom, or personal truth, these lives unfolded at great risk, often exposed only in court documents or inquisitorial records. One such story, recorded in 1395, concerns a person named John Reichner, who lived in London and was arrested for dressing in women's clothing and offering services to men. In the lengthy legal document that followed, Reichner described working as an embroiderer and also taking on the name Eleanor while living with a female companion. The record is sensationalized, of course crafted by authorities who viewed deviation as a curiosity or threat, but it offers a rare and valuable window into the complex tapestry of identity and affection in medieval times. Outside of towns and courts, among travelling performers, Roma communities, and itinerant workers, we find even less documentation, but this too is telling. These groups, though often marginalised or mistrusted, carried their own customs and norms. Love might have looked very different among the more flexible, less burdened by land and lineage. For many, love had to be secret. Lovers might meet by night, exchange tokens in code, or confide in trusted friends who could cover their tracks. There are folk tales, preserved orally and later recorded by scribes, that hint at these hidden storious tales of star-crossed lovers who vanish into the woods, of women who dress as men to be near the ones they love, of men who go to sea, never to return, while another waits silently at the harbour's edge. These were not tales of glory, but of quiet endurance, of emotional truths lived behind veils, beneath cloaks, within letters burned or buried. And though society refused to legitimize them, the strength of their persistence speaks volumes. In the soft silence of these hidden lives, we find something deeply human, the need to connect, to be seen, to belong however quietly, however briefly. Now, as we step from the margins back toward the center of daily life, our path will lead us into the spaces where youth first encountered love's expectations, the family home. In the next segment, we'll explore the parental role in courtship and how marriage arrangements were choreographed with all the delicacy and coercion of a stage play. Let us now return to the homenot, the cottage of the peasant, or the chamber of the noble, but the broader domestic sphere where family held sway over nearly every detail of a young person's life, especially in matters of love. In the medieval world, marriage was never just about two individuals. It was a convergence of property, honor, alliances, and legacy, and families were the architects of these unions. Whether wealthy or poor, rural or urban, parents played a decisive role in selecting and approving marital partners. Their word was often final. Close your eyes if you wish, and imagine a household in late 13th century Tuscany. The family gathers in a cool stone courtyard after sundown. The evening air smells of rosemary and oil lamps, and the voices are low, deliberate. Here, a merchant father and mother discuss the prospects of their daughter, only 12 years old, with the representatives of another house. The girl herself is upstairs, perhaps already in bed, unaware of the binding agreement being forged beneath her window. This was not uncommon. Daughters, especially, were seen as extensions of family interest. A well-matched marriage could elevate a family's position, strengthen trade ties, or resolve an old rivalry. Sons, too, were expected to comply, often marrying to secure inheritances or reinforce bloodlines. Betrothals could be arranged at startlingly young ages, sometimes even in infancy, though marriages were usually not consummated until later after a girl's puberty or a boy's majority. The emotional reality remained. One's future was decided before it had truly begun. Families took great care in negotiating dowries and bride prices. These financial arrangements were legally binding and often detailed in long contracts composed by scribes and witnessed by community elders. The failure to uphold a dowry agreement could lead to lawsuits, broken alliances, and shame. Even in peasant families, where resources were sparse, marriage negotiations involved practical considerations. A daughter might bring a cow or a few tools into a union. A groom might offer labor to his father, in-law's farm. These exchanges were not mere tokens, they were the foundation of survival. And yet, within these rigid frameworks, there was room for quiet resistance. In some regions, a couple could choose to elope, usually under the cover of night, though this risked scandal and disinheritance. In others, communities practiced marriage by consent, a legal loophole where two individuals could declare themselves married before witnesses without formal approval. These unions were valid, though frowned upon by the church and families alike. There are even tales of mock trials or staged kidnappings used as excuses to bypass familial arrangements rituals designed to make a union appear forced when in fact it was desired. In such cases, the line between coercion and cunning blurred, and local customs often took precedence over formal law. Of course, such tactics were risky. A family might retaliate by severing ties, withholding inheritance, or petitioning a bishop to annul the match. For young lovers, the price of disobedience could be a lifetime of estrangement or worse. At the same time, there are records of more compassionate negotiations. Letters from some parents reveal concern for their children's well-being, even affection. A mother might ask that her daughter be married near home, so she would not be lonely. A father might seek a son-in-law known for his kindness, not just his land. These voices are quieter in the historical record, but they exist like footprints in soft earth, nearly washed away by time. It is important to remember, too, that in many cases, once a marriage was finalized, families still exerted influence. A wife might be sent home if she failed to produce children. A husband might be reprimanded by his father for treating his bride too coldly, too kindly. Parents, siblings, and in-laws lingered in the corners of medieval relationships, always watching, always advising. Now, as we leave behind the controlling corridors of kinship, let us drift into more symbolic territory. In the next chapter, we'll turn our attention to the rituals and superstitions that surrounded love-strange customs, forgotten blessings, and peculiar beliefs that shaped how people understood attraction, marriage, and the uncertain fortunes of the heart. From the hard certainty of arranged marriages and familial control, we now move into a gentler, more mysterious terrain where belief, hope, and ritual intertwined with the pursuit of love. In the medieval world, love was not simply a social contract. It was also a matter of fate, fortune, and divine will. As such, people turned not only to their families or priests, but also to charms, omens, and rituals to guide their romantic lives. Picture a quiet village on the eve of midsummer. The sky hangs in a deep indigo, and bonfires crackle in the open fields. Young people weave garlands of wildflowers, particularly mugwort and vervain, believed to attract affection or ward off ill-matched suitors. As the flames rise, couples leap hand in hand over the fire, their shadows stretching behind them. To leap cleanly is said to ensure harmony in marriage. To stumble, well, best not to dwell on that. Such seasonal festivals were often steeped in layers of courtship tradition. On May Day, villagers danced around the maypole, an ancient symbol of fertility. The dance itself was an invitation to flirtation, swift, circular, and full of unspoken glances. These were moments when strict social roles briefly loosened, and the young could explore possibilities before their paths were firmly set. Superstition also entered the private realm. A maiden might place a sprig of rosemary under her pillow on St. Agnes's Eve, hoping to dream of her future husband. On Valentine's Day, yes, it was observed even then, especially by the literate classes. Names might be drawn from a hat, creating valentines for a day. This practice could result in whispered secrets or short-lived affection, always bound by strict propriety. Then there were love tokens: a ribbon from a sleeve, a single glove, a lock of hair tied with a cord of red thread. Such objects carried symbolic weight, often worn close to the skin or hidden in a prayer book. In tournaments, a knight might fight with a lady's token bound to his arm, even if the lady was not his wife but the object of more poetic clandestine affection. Weddings themselves were filled with symbolic acts: the blessing of the marital bed, the ceremonial crossing of thresholds, the sharing of ale or bread. Each gesture aimed to bind the couple not just legally, but spiritually. Some rituals were regional, others were inherited from pagan customs and quietly repurposed under Christian oversight. And yet, superstition was not always benevolent. A woman who struggled to conceive might be suspected of offending love itself, or worse, be whispered about as cursed. In some cases, a wife accused of infidelity could be subjected to humiliating ordeals designed to prove her purity, holding a hot iron, for instance, or swearing innocence on a holy relic. The outcomes were rarely fair, and often predetermined by local politics or personal vendettas. Curses and love potions were also part of the medieval imagination. Apothecaries and cunning folk sold herbal blends said to inspire passion or cool unwanted advances. These concoctions were made from common plants: fennel, thyme, yarrow, though their effects were likely more psychological than chemical. Still, the belief in their power was real. A love potion could stir both excitement and fear, and using one without consent was considered not only unethical but dangerously close to sorcery. The church took a wary stance on these customs. It tolerated some, condemned others, and tried often in vain to draw firm lines between folk belief and heresy. But the people, especially in rural areas, continued to trust in the old ways, whispering charms at dawn and burying amulets in the hearth. Through these rituals, we glimpse a culture not devoid of emotion, but one that sought to shape and protect love through tradition. In a world where so much was uncertain harvests, health, war, superstition offered a sense of control. It provided answers, or at least comfort, where none were otherwise given. Now, as the embers of those festival fires fade and the tokens of affection are tucked quietly away, let us wander one last path into the legal and ecclesiastical complexities that defined who could and could not be wed. In our next and final segment before the conclusion, we'll explore the mechanics of marriage itself and the surprising, often convoluted regulations that governed romantic unions in the medieval world. As we approach the final turn in our journey through the tangle of medieval courtship, we find ourselves in the quiet chambers of law and canon where romance, already fragile, met its most elaborate restraints. To fall in love was complicated, but to marry legally, sacramentally, and socially was a precise act, measured in rituals, documentation, and approvals. It was not enough to simply choose one another. The church, the local lord, and sometimes the king himself all had their say. Beginning in the 12th century, the Catholic Church grew increasingly involved in regulating marriage. Prior to this, local customs and secular courts handled most unions, but as church authority expanded, so too did its reach into the intimate corners of daily life. By the 13th century, marriage had become a sacramenta, sacred act overseen by the clergy and governed by canon law. It was no longer simply a social contract. It was a divine covenant, indissoluble and carefully prescribed. And yet, the process was full of contradiction. Unlike today, a marriage did not require a priest or even a church to be considered valid. What truly mattered in the eyes of canon law was mutual consent. If a man and a woman declared themselves wed, either publicly or privately, and consummated the union, it was binding. These informal marriages, called clandestine marriages, were common, especially among the lower classes and in cases where couples wished to bypass familial or social barriers. Such unions caused considerable anxiety for both parents and churchmen. With no witnesses or documentation, proving or disproving the marriage later could be difficult, particularly if disputes over inheritance arose. As a result, councils and clerics spent centuries trying to stamp out the practice, to little avail. Human nature, it seems, was rarely impressed by bureaucracy. The church also set rules on who could marry whom. Consanguinity laws prohibited unions between individuals related within 7 degrees, later reduced to 4. This might sound generous, but in tight-knit villages or noble circles, the pool of eligible, unrelated partners was often remarkably small. Dispensations could be granted, especially for the nobility, but these came at a cost, both financial and political. Royal houses, in particular, were notorious for skirting these rules when advantageous, only to have their marriages later challenged for convenience. Marriages could be annulled under certain conditions. If it could be proven that one party was already married, too closely related, underage, or coerced, the union might be dissolved. However, the process was complex and often scandalous, as it involved airing private matters before ecclesiastical courts. Such cases were rare, but not unheard of, especially when noble titles or wealth were at stake. Then there were the more peculiar prohibitions. Impediments to marriage included not only blood relation, but also spiritual kinship. If two people had shared a godparent, for instance, they were considered spiritually related and thus ineligible to wed. Similarly, if a man had once been married to a woman, he could not then marry her sister. These rules, rooted in theology and tradition, were often unknown until challenged, and sometimes only discovered when it was too late. Even the timing of marriage was regulated. Church law forbade weddings during certain liturgical seasons, particularly during Lent or Advent unless a special dispensation was obtained. This was not merely a matter of piety. The Church viewed marriage as a joyful event, inappropriate during periods of fasting or penance. To marry, then, was to navigate a labyrinth of spiritual and social constraints. And while the Church claimed to protect the sanctity of the union, its involvement often made love less a spontaneous connection and more a careful negotiation. Still, amidst the rules and restrictions, couples found their way. Some married in secret, others in grand ceremony. Some stayed together out of duty, others out of fondness. Some unions were brief, others enduring, but all were shaped by the deeply layered, sometimes contradictory forces of law, custom, and belief. As the bells of the cathedral fade into the night, and the final parchment is rolled and sealed, we prepare now to close this long, winding journey. Let us turn, in our concluding moments, to reflection and to the quiet comfort of our own time, where love, though never simple, is more often our own to choose. Now, dear listener, we drift back across the century softly, like fog rolling over a forgotten moor. The noise of medieval life grows distant. The tolling of bells, the shuffle of boots on cobblestone, the murmur of prayers in candlelit chapels, all fade now into quiet. We have wandered through the tangled pathways of medieval courtship among peasants and queens, across ruins and manuscripts, into rooms shaped by law, fear, hope, and ritual. We have seen that for most, love was not a journey of personal desire, but a path shaped by lineage, property, and obedience. And yet, in small moments in letters, glances, charms, and rebellions, we found the unmistakable pulse of human longing. Dating in the Middle Ages was not romantic in the modern sense. It was, for many, a duty, a burden, a quiet resignation to forces greater than themselves. For others, it was a quiet resistance, a secret vow whispered behind a church, a ring inscribed with poetry and tucked into a sleeve, a secret grave beside a lover. And though so much has changed, there remains something eternal in the search for connection, in the hope that someone, somewhere, might understand us, might see us, might stay. Tonight, we leave behind the thatched roofs, the towers, the cloisters and courts. You are no longer the unseen guest in the cold stone manor, or the watchful eye in the village green. You are here in the warmth of your own room, beneath soft blankets, the hum of electricity in the walls, your name your own to shape. You may love as you wish now. You may wait. You may wander. You may choose. Let that be your comfort as you rest. For while the past may offer lessons, stories, and shadows, it is the quiet present this very moment that offers peace. Sleep well, traveller of time. The history will still be here when you wake,